Funny how the people who promise they'll never leave are usually the ones you spend years trying to forget. Claire Bennett tightened both hands around the steering wheel as rain slammed against the windshield hard enough to blur the highway into streaks of white and red light. The old Honda Civic trembled beneath her like it was begging to give up, and somewhere in the back seat, 8-year-old Noah shifted under his oversized hoodie and looked out the fogged-up window. "Mom," he said quietly. "The car's making that sound again." Claire forced a smile she didn't feel. "I know, baby. We're almost home." But even as she said it, the engine coughed once, then twice, before the dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. Her stomach dropped. No, no, no. The car jerked violently before rolling to a stop on the shoulder of the highway. Outside, the storm raged harder, cold rain hammering the roof while trucks roared past, spraying sheets of water across the glass. Claire closed her eyes for one exhausted second. She had just finished a double shift at the diner. Her feet ached. Her rent was already 4 days late, and the last thing she could afford was another repair bill on a car that should have died years ago. Noah leaned forward between the seats. "Are we stuck?" Claire swallowed the lump rising in her throat and turned around with a soft smile. "Only for a minute." She grabbed her phone, but the screen flashed 10% battery. "No signal." "Of course. Stay inside, okay? Keep the doors locked." Before Noah could answer, she pushed the door open and stepped into the freezing rain. Wind whipped her blonde hair across her face instantly as she wrapped her thin cardigan tighter around herself and stared helplessly at the smoking hood. "Come on," she whispered to the car. "Please." Headlights appeared behind her a few moments later. A black SUV slowed before pulling onto the shoulders several yards away. Claire's chest tightened immediately. A man stepped out holding a dark umbrella against the storm. Tall, broad shoulders, expensive charcoal coat. Definitely not someone who belonged on the side of a broken highway at 11:30 on a Thursday night. He walked toward her calmly, rain splashing around polished shoes that probably cost more than her monthly groceries. "Car trouble?" he asked. His voice was low and steady, the kind that made people instinctively listen. Claire hesitated. "I've got it." The man glanced toward the smoking hood. "Doesn't look like it." Normally, Claire would have refused help immediately. Life had taught her not to trust strangers too easily. But another gust of freezing wind hit her, and she looked back toward Noah sitting alone in the back seat. "It just died," she admitted quietly. "I think it overheated." The man nodded once before setting down the umbrella beside the car like this wasn't beneath him at all. "Mind if I take a look?" Claire studied him carefully under the highway lights. He looked somewhere in his late 30s, clean-cut, dark hair dampened by rain, sharp jawline, calm gray eyes. There was something strangely familiar about him, though she couldn't explain why. "You know cars?" she asked cautiously. A faint smile touched his lips. "I grew up fixing things that broke." Before she could respond, he rolled up the sleeves of his expensive coat and opened the hood without hesitation. Steam curled into the cold night air while he examined the engine with surprising confidence. Claire stood frozen for a moment, watching rain collect on his shoulders while passing headlights flashed across his face. Noah suddenly lowered the back window an inch. "Mom," he whispered loudly, "that guy's rich." Claire almost laughed despite herself. "How do you know?" Noah pointed toward the man's wrist. "His watch." The stranger glanced up at them then, catching Noah staring. Instead of looking annoyed, he smiled warmly at the little boy. "Smart kid," he said. Then his eyes shifted back to Claire again, lingering for half a second too long. And for some reason she couldn't explain, her heart skipped painfully inside her chest. The stranger worked in silence for several minutes while rain poured over the empty highway, his hands moving confidently beneath the hood as though he had done this 1,000 times before. Claire stood beside the driver's door, hugging herself against the cold, trying not to stare at him too much. Something about the way he carried himself felt strangely familiar. Not just the calm confidence or the expensive clothes. It was smaller than that. The way he tilted his head slightly when concentrating. The way he exhaled softly before touching anything mechanical. Tiny details her mind recognized before her memory could catch up. "Your radiator hose is loose," he finally said. "It is leaking coolant." Claire let out a tired breath. "Is that bad?" He glanced at her with the faintest hint of amusement. "Not ideal." Noah pushed the back door open before Claire could stop him. "Can I help?" The man smiled immediately. "Sure." Hand me that flashlight. Noah hurried over, sneakers splashing through puddles as he grabbed the flashlight from Claire's glove compartment. Claire almost apologized for the mess inside the car, but the stranger did not seem to notice the scattered crayons, grocery receipts, and folded diner apron shoved into the passenger seat. Noah held the flashlight proudly while the man tightened something beneath the hood. "What is your name?" Noah asked. "Ethan," the man answered. Claire froze for half a second at the sound of it. Ethan. The name hit her chest strangely, like hearing an old song from another life. But there were millions of men named Ethan in America. She told herself not to be ridiculous. Noah grinned. "I am Noah. Nice to meet you, Noah." Ethan looked toward Claire again. "And you are?" "Claire." The second her name left her lips, something changed in his expression. It was subtle, so subtle most people would have missed it completely. His hands paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing. Rain tapped steadily against the metal hood between them. "Claire," he repeated quietly, almost like he was testing how the name sounded after a very long time. A strange tension settled into the air. Claire looked away first. "You really do not have to do this," she said softly. "Most people would have kept driving." Ethan shrugged lightly while wiping his hands with a cloth from the SUV. "Most people probably should have." Noah tilted his head. "Are you rich?" Claire nearly choked. "Noah." But Ethan laughed under his breath. A real laugh this time. Warm. Unexpected. "What makes you think that?" Noah pointed again toward the silver watch peeking from Ethan's sleeve. "My teacher says watches like that cost more than cars." Ethan glanced down at the watch before looking back at Noah. "Your teacher sounds smart." Claire felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "I am sorry. He asks whatever pops into his head. That usually means he is honest." Ethan closed the hood gently. "Try starting it now." Claire slid into the driver's seat while Noah climbed back inside beside her. She turned the key nervously. The engine struggled once before roaring back to life smoothly. Relief hit her so hard she almost laughed. "Oh my God." Ethan stepped back from the hood as rain soaked through his dark hair. "You should be able to make it home now, but that hose still needs replacing tomorrow." Claire rolled down the window slightly despite the rain. "Thank you." "Seriously." Ethan nodded once, but instead of walking away immediately, his eyes lingered on her face again with quiet confusion. Like he was trying to solve a memory he could almost touch. Claire felt it too now. That uncomfortable familiarity growing stronger by the second. Then Noah leaned between the seats and whispered loudly enough for Ethan to hear. "Mom, he keeps looking at you like he knows you." Silence fell for one long heartbeat while rain hammered the roof of the car. Ethan's expression shifted slightly at the words, and for the first time since stopping on that highway, Claire noticed something she had somehow missed before. There was an old sadness in his eyes, the kind that does not disappear even after years of pretending. Claire drove the remaining 12 miles home with both hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary while rain streaked across the windshield in silver lines. Noah had fallen asleep in the back seat halfway through the drive, his small head leaning against the window while soft music played low through the old speakers. But Claire could not stop thinking about the man on the highway. Ethan. Even now, his face lingered in her mind with unsettling clarity. The calm gray eyes. The familiar voice. The strange way he had looked at her after hearing her name. It bothered her more than she wanted to admit. By the time she pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, the storm had finally begun to calm. The building looked exactly like every other tired building in the neighborhood. Faded paint, flickering lights, rusted stair rails. Claire carefully carried Noah upstairs after he fell asleep completely, his small arms wrapped around her shoulders while she climbed 3 flights with aching legs. Inside apartment 3B, the familiar scent of laundry detergent and cheap coffee greeted her immediately. The place was tiny. 2 rooms, thin walls, second-hand furniture. But it was clean, warm, and theirs. Claire tucked Noah into bed gently before standing there for a moment brushing damp hair away from his forehead. Watching him sleep always gave her the same painful mix of exhaustion and determination. No matter how hard life became, she could never afford to fall apart. Not completely. Her phone buzzed suddenly in her pocket. A message from her landlord. Rent must be paid by Friday morning. No more extensions. Claire closed her eyes slowly. Friday was less than 48 hours away. She walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Half a gallon of milk. Eggs. Leftover pasta. A pack of hot dogs. Enough to survive another week if she stretched everything carefully. The radiator repair alone would probably wipe out what little money she had left after daycare and utilities. She leaned both hands against the kitchen counter and let out a shaky breath. Sometimes she wondered how much longer she could keep pretending she was handling everything fine. The next morning came too fast. Claire slept barely 4 hours before her alarm dragged her awake at 6:30. By 7:15, she was helping Noah get dressed for school while simultaneously checking online banking on her cracked phone screen. The number staring back at her made her chest tighten instantly. $84.17. That was all she had until next Tuesday. Mom. Noah sat at the table eating cereal while studying her face carefully. Are you worried again? Claire forced a smile immediately. Nope. Just tired. Noah looked unconvinced but did not push further. He had learned too early how to recognize stress in adults. After dropping him off at school, Claire drove straight to Parker's auto repair with nervous dread twisting in her stomach. The mechanic spent less than 5 minutes looking under the hood before giving her the estimate. About $600 with labor. Claire actually laughed once in disbelief. You are kidding. The mechanic shook his head sympathetically. Sorry. $600 might as well have been $6,000. Claire thanked him quietly before climbing back into the car and staring blankly through the windshield. Outside, morning traffic rushed past, while people carried coffees and hurried into office buildings like normal life was still easy somewhere. Her phone buzzed again, this time from the diner manager. Can you cover tonight too? Someone called out. Claire stared at the message for several seconds before typing back one word. Yes. By the time evening arrived, her feet already hurt before her shift even started. The diner smelled like coffee, fried food, and rain-soaked jackets as customers filled the booths escaping the cold weather outside. Claire balanced 3 plates carefully while moving between tables with practiced speed, smiling automatically even when customers barely looked at her face. Around 8:30, the bell above the diner door chimed softly. Claire turned instinctively toward the entrance while wiping her hands on her apron. And for one suspended second, her entire body went still. Ethan stood near the doorway in a dark coat, rain still clinging lightly to his shoulders as his gray eyes found hers immediately across the crowded diner. For a moment, neither of them moved. The noise of the diner faded strangely around Claire as Ethan stood near the entrance watching her with the same unreadable expression he had worn on the highway. Warm light from the hanging lamps softened the sharp lines of his face, and somehow he looked even more out of place here than he had beside her broken car. Men like him did not usually walk into small roadside diners on rainy Thursday nights. Claire looked away first, suddenly aware of her wrinkled apron and loose ponytail that had started falling apart hours ago. She forced herself back into motion before her manager noticed her standing still. Table or booth? She asked automatically when Ethan approached the counter. A faint smile touched his mouth. Booth is fine. Claire grabbed a menu quickly and led him toward the far corner near the window. Rain rolled softly down the glass outside, while tired country music played overhead. Ethan slid into the booth without taking his eyes off her. I did not expect to see you again so soon, Claire admitted while setting down the menu. Neither did I, he said quietly. Something about the way he answered made her pulse shift uncomfortably. Claire cleared her throat and reached for her notepad. Can I get you something? Ethan glanced at the menu briefly before looking back up. Coffee. Anything else? Depends. Are you eating tonight? Claire blinked once, caught off guard by the question. Eventually. Then bring whatever you are having. Before she could answer, another waitress called her name from across the diner. Claire nodded quickly and walked away before the strange warmth in Ethan's eyes unsettled her even more. 20 minutes later, she returned carrying coffee and a plate of turkey club sandwiches with fries. Ethan thanked her softly while she slid into the seat across from him for the first time all night. You do not have to sit, he said. I know you are working. Claire glanced around the diner. It is slow for once. Ethan wrapped both hands around the coffee mug, studying her quietly over the steam rising between them. You look tired. Claire laughed softly without humor. That obvious? Only to someone who recognizes it. His answer lingered between them longer than it should have. Claire looked down at her untouched fries. So what does someone like you do wandering around highways in the rain fixing strangers' cars? Ethan smiled faintly. Someone like me? Expensive SUV. Expensive watch. Definitely not diner coffee territory. To her surprise, Ethan actually looked amused. You forgot the expensive coat. Claire pointed a fry at him. That too. For the first time since meeting him, she saw something lighter break through his calm exterior. Not arrogance. Not charm. Just warmth. Familiar warmth. It hit her chest unexpectedly hard. Ethan took a slow sip of coffee before speaking again. I had meetings nearby. Business. Something like that. Claire studied him carefully. He answered questions the way people did when they were used to keeping pieces of themselves hidden. But beneath the polished exterior, there was still something strangely familiar she could not place. Then the diner speakers shifted to another old song, playing softly overhead. Claire froze instantly the moment she heard it. A quiet acoustic song from almost 15 years ago. Ethan's eyes lifted toward the ceiling at the exact same moment. You still hate this song? He asked absent-mindedly. Silence crashed between them. Claire's heart stopped completely for one terrifying second. Slowly, Ethan realized what he had just said. His expression changed instantly. Shock, confusion, recognition. Claire stared at him across the booth while the song continued playing quietly in the background. What did you just say? She whispered. Ethan leaned back slowly, like the ground beneath him had suddenly shifted. He looked at her more carefully now. Not casually, not curiously, like someone staring directly at a ghost from another lifetime. Claire's breathing became shallow, because suddenly she remembered it too. Summer nights, football games, that exact song playing from an old pickup truck parked near the lake. Ethan swallowed hard. Claire. The way he said her name this time was different. Not unfamiliar anymore. Certain. Then his eyes widened slightly, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he said the words that made her entire world tilt sideways. Claire Bennett from Brookfield High. Claire stared at him across the booth while the diner seemed to disappear around them completely. Brookfield High. Nobody had said those words to her in years. Not since she left that town carrying more heartbreak than memories. Ethan looked just as shaken as she felt, his gray eyes fixed on her like he still could not believe what he was seeing. Oh my God, Claire whispered finally. Ethan let out a breath that sounded almost unsteady. It is really you. For a second, neither of them spoke. The old song continued softly overhead, while 20 different memories crashed through Claire's chest all at once. Summer bonfires near Miller Lake. Friday night football games. Cheap milkshakes after school. A tall teenage boy with messy dark hair grinning at her from the driver's seat of an old blue pickup truck. Ethan Carter. Her first love. The boy who once promised her they would leave Brookfield together someday. The boy who disappeared without a goodbye. Claire looked away first, suddenly overwhelmed by how hard her heart was beating. You look different, she said quietly. Ethan smiled faintly. So do you? No, I mean. Claire shook her head softly. You really changed. Ethan leaned back slightly, still watching her carefully. You did not. She laughed once under her breath. Trust me, I definitely did. But even as she said it, Ethan's expression softened in a way that made her stomach tighten unexpectedly. Like he could still see the 17-year-old girl she used to be beneath the exhaustion and worry life had layered onto her over the years. I cannot believe this, he admitted quietly. I spent half the night trying to figure out why you looked familiar. Claire folded her arms lightly across herself. You recognized me from a song? No, Ethan shook his head slowly. I think part of me recognized you the second I saw you standing in the rain. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. Claire looked down at the coffee cup between her hands, unable to hold his gaze for too long. You vanished, she said softly before she could stop herself. Ethan went still. The warmth in the booth faded instantly beneath the weight of those two words. Claire immediately regretted saying it out loud, but after 15 years, the pain still existed somewhere deep inside her, whether she admitted it or not. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. Claire, one day you were there, she continued carefully, forcing her voice to stay calm. And then suddenly you were gone. Ethan rubbed a hand slowly across his jaw like he had carried that same memory for years too. My father lost his job, he said quietly. We had to leave overnight. Chicago. Claire frowned slightly. Overnight. Ethan nodded once. Everything collapsed fast. We lost the house 2 weeks later. That stunned her more than she expected. In high school, Ethan had never been rich. Far from it. He worked at a gas station after school and spent weekends repairing engines with his uncle just to help his parents pay bills. Claire still remembered grease stains on his hands and the way he used to apologize for taking her on cheap dates even though she never cared. "I wrote to you," Claire admitted before she could stop herself. Ethan's eyes snapped back to hers immediately. "You did?" She nodded faintly. "3 times. His face changed completely. "Claire, I never got any letters." Silence settled heavily between them again. Claire studied him carefully, trying to decide whether she believed him. The strange thing was, she did. Ethan looked genuinely shaken. "I thought." He stopped himself halfway through the sentence. "What?" Claire asked quietly. Ethan stared at her for a long moment before answering. "I thought you moved on." Claire almost laughed at the painful irony of that statement, because she had spent years believing the exact same thing about him. A loud voice suddenly interrupted from across the diner. "Claire, table 6 needs refills." She blinked quickly, pulled back into reality. The diner. Her shift. Her life now. Claire stood immediately and grabbed the coffee pot before emotions could rise any closer to the surface. Ethan watched her carefully as she moved to leave. "Claire." She paused beside the booth without fully turning around. His voice dropped lower this time. Softer. "I looked for you when I came back." Her breath caught instantly. Slowly, Claire turned toward him again while rain slid down the diner windows behind him. And for the first time that night, she realized this reunion might hurt far more than either of them was prepared for. Claire barely slept after her shift ended. Ethan's words kept replaying in her head long after she tucked Noah into bed and turned off the apartment lights. "I looked for you when I came back." The sentence lingered painfully inside her chest because part of her wanted to believe him. Another part refused to. At 7 the next morning, her alarm dragged her awake again. Claire moved through the apartment quietly, exhausted before the day even started. She packed Noah's lunch, searched the couch cushions for enough quarters to cover laundry later that week, and silently prayed the Honda would survive another day without breaking down again. "Mom," Noah said while tying his sneakers, "do you think the highway guy is famous?" Claire glanced over. "Why would you ask that?" Noah shrugged. "He looked like somebody from television." Claire almost smiled. Not everyone with a nice coat is famous. But the truth was, she had wondered the same thing herself. There had been something unusually polished about Ethan now. Controlled. Successful. Nothing like the restless teenage boy she remembered from Brookfield. After dropping Noah off at school, Claire headed toward the diner for her lunch shift. Halfway there, her phone buzzed with a notification from social media. Normally she ignored them, but a photo preview caught her attention instantly. Her car nearly drifted slightly before she tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Ethan stared back at her from the screen, wearing a tailored black suit beside the headline. Ethan Carter announces $12 million education initiative. Claire's breath caught. She pulled into a gas station parking lot immediately and clicked the article with shaking fingers. There he was. The same gray eyes. The same calm expression. Except now he stood in front of cameras beside politicians and executives. CEO of Carter Technologies. Estimated net worth, $1 billion. Featured in Forbes. Named one of America's top entrepreneurs under 40. Claire stared at the screen in complete disbelief. Oh my God. Suddenly, every detail made sense. The SUV. The watch. The expensive coat. The quiet confidence of someone used to being listened to the second he walked into a room. Ethan was not just successful. He belonged to an entirely different world now. And somehow that realization hurt more than she expected. Because the teenage boy who once fixed engines behind his uncle's garage had become someone impossible to reach. Her chest tightened strangely as she scrolled farther through photos of him smiling beside celebrities, investors, and glamorous women at charity events. The comments beneath the article praised him like he was untouchable. Visionary. Brilliant. America's favorite billionaire. Claire locked her phone suddenly and stared through the windshield. She felt foolish now, sitting across from him at the diner, laughing with him like 15 years had not changed everything between them. By the time she arrived at work, she had already made up her mind. Distance. That was safer. Ethan Carter might have once been her first love, but billionaire CEOs did not belong in the same life as single mothers struggling to pay rent. Around noon, the diner bell chimed again. Claire's stomach dropped instantly before she even looked up. Ethan walked inside wearing a dark navy coat, holding 2 coffees in one hand. Several women near the counter immediately recognized him. Claire saw it happen in real time. Whispering. staring, phone subtly lifting for photos. Ethan ignored all of it completely and looked directly at her instead. "Hi," he said softly once he reached the counter. Claire forced professional politeness onto her face. "Table or booth?" Ethan frowned slightly at the sudden distance in her tone. "Claire, booth is fine," she continued evenly before grabbing menus. Ethan followed her silently to the same booth from the night before. Claire set down the menu quickly. "Your waitress will be right with you." Before she could walk away, Ethan spoke quietly enough that nobody else could hear. "You look me up." Claire crossed her arms lightly. "Kind of hard not to." Ethan leaned back slowly, studying her expression. "And now you are avoiding me." "No," Claire gave a tight smile. "I just realized we live in very different worlds." For the first time since reconnecting, something almost painful crossed Ethan's face. Like that sentence bothered him far more than it should have. Then he looked at her steadily and asked, "Is that really what you think matters?" Claire opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out immediately. Because the truth was, she did think it mattered. Men like Ethan lived in penthouses and appeared on magazine covers now. Women like her counted grocery dollars in parking lots and prayed old cars survived another week. The distance between those two lives felt impossible to ignore. Ethan watched her carefully from across the booth, his expression calm but unreadable. "You disappeared for 15 years and came back a billionaire," Claire said finally, keeping her voice low enough that nearby customers could not hear. "I think that changes things." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Not everything." Claire looked away first. "Maybe not for you." Before he could respond, her manager called her name from the kitchen. Claire grabbed the coffee pot immediately, grateful for the interruption. "I have to work." Ethan nodded slowly, but his eyes stayed on her as she walked away. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Claire avoided Ethan as much as possible, but every time she looked toward the booth, she found him watching her with quiet focus. Not in a possessive way, not arrogant, just attentive, like he was trying to memorize someone he thought he had lost forever. Around 3 o'clock, Ethan finally stood to leave. Claire was wiping down the counter when he approached quietly. "Claire." She looked up cautiously. Ethan placed a folded $20 bill beside his untouched coffee cup. "I meant what I said last night." "About what?" "Looking for you." Something tightened painfully in her chest again. Ethan hesitated for a second before continuing. "When I came back to Brookfield after college, I went to your old house." Claire's hand froze around the towel. "What?" "The people living there told me your mother had moved away years earlier." Claire stared at him silently. "I checked social media. Old classmates. Everybody I could think of." Ethan smiled faintly without humor. "You vanished better than I did." Claire looked down at the counter because suddenly holding eye contact felt impossible. "Life happened," she whispered. Ethan nodded once like he understood more than she realized. Then his eyes softened slightly. "I never forgot you, Claire." The honesty in his voice hit harder than she was prepared for. Before she could respond, the diner door opened suddenly, and Noah rushed inside wearing his backpack, his face brightening instantly the second he spotted Ethan. "Highway guy." Several customers turned at the loud greeting. Claire blinked in surprise. "Noah? What are you doing here?" "Mrs. Jensen dropped me off because you forgot it was early dismissal." Guilt flashed across Claire's face immediately. "Oh honey, I am sorry." But Noah had already run over to Ethan's booth. "Mom says you are famous." Claire closed her eyes briefly. Ethan laughed softly under his breath. "Your mom says a lot of things about me, apparently." Noah grinned before noticing the untouched fries still sitting on the table. "Are you not eating those?" Ethan slid the plate toward him instantly. "Be my guest." Claire watched the interaction quietly while something unfamiliar stirred inside her chest. Ethan looked strangely natural talking to Noah. Comfortable. Warm. Not performative like celebrities on television. Noah happily stole a fry before studying Ethan curiously. "Did you really know my mom in high school?" Ethan glanced toward Claire briefly before answering. "Yeah. A long time ago." "Was she nice back then too?" Claire groaned softly. "Noah." But Ethan smiled fully for the first time all day. "She was actually kind of terrifying." Claire blinked in disbelief. "Excuse me. You used to yell at referees during basketball games." Noah burst into laughter instantly. "Mom." Claire felt heat rush into her cheeks despite herself. "I was passionate." Ethan shook his head lightly. "You almost got thrown out once." Noah laughed harder while Claire stared at Ethan across the table, stunned he still remembered something so small after all these years. Then Noah suddenly asked the question that shifted the air between them completely. If you knew my mom before, how come you disappeared? Silence fell instantly across the booth. Ethan's smile faded slowly while Claire's stomach tightened. Noah looked innocently between them, unaware of the wound he had just touched. Ethan looked at Claire quietly for a long second before answering in a low voice. That is a really long story, buddy. But the sadness behind his eyes said it was a story neither of them had truly survived. After Noah's question, the atmosphere around the booth shifted into something quieter and far more fragile. Claire quickly grabbed her son's backpack from the floor and forced a small smile. Okay, buddy. Time to let the man finish his coffee. Noah looked between them curiously, clearly sensing tension even if he did not fully understand it. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a wrapped chocolate bar before sliding it toward him. Peace offering for stealing my fries. Noah's face lit up immediately. Mom, can I? Claire sighed softly. Say thank you first. Thank you. Ethan smiled faintly. You are welcome. Claire helped Noah put his backpack back on while avoiding Ethan's eyes completely now. Everything felt too complicated suddenly. Too personal. She had spent years building careful walls around the parts of herself that still remembered him. And now every conversation threatened to tear those walls apart. I should get him home, she said quietly. Ethan nodded once before standing. Claire, wait. She paused reluctantly. Ethan hesitated like he was choosing his next words carefully. Would you let me take you both to dinner sometime? Claire blinked in surprise. Noah looked thrilled instantly. Yes. Noah, Claire warned softly. Ethan's expression remained calm, but there was something sincere beneath it that made saying no harder than it should have been. It does not have to mean anything complicated, he said gently. I just miss talking to you. That sentence landed deeper than Claire wanted it to. For years she had convinced herself Ethan Carter was simply a painful memory. But standing there now, hearing honesty in his voice again after all this time, she realized some people never really leave your heart completely no matter how hard you try to move on. I do not know, she admitted quietly. Ethan accepted the answer without pushing. Fair enough. Claire nodded once before taking Noah's hand and heading toward the diner exit. But just before reaching the door, she glanced back instinctively. Ethan was still standing beside the booth watching them leave. Not distracted by his phone, not checking emails, just watching her with the same quiet intensity that had unsettled her since the highway. That night, Claire sat alone at the tiny kitchen table after Noah fell asleep, staring at overdue bills spread across the surface. Electric, rent, car repair estimate. Her head throbbed from exhaustion while rain tapped softly against the apartment windows again. She picked up her calculator, trying to figure out which bill could wait another week without disaster. The answer was none of them. Her phone buzzed suddenly beside the bills. Unknown number. Claire hesitated before answering cautiously. Hello. Claire Bennett, a woman's voice asked professionally. Yes. This is Melissa from Parker's Auto Repair. I am calling to let you know your balance has been fully paid. Claire frowned instantly. What? The radiator repair? Someone came in about an hour ago and covered the entire amount. Claire sat upright immediately. There has to be a mistake. No, ma'am. Everything is cleared. Claire's stomach dropped because she already knew exactly who had done it. Did the person leave a name? She asked quietly, even though she already knew the answer. Ethan Carter. Claire closed her eyes slowly. Of course. After hanging up, she sat motionless for several seconds, staring at the dark apartment around her. Part of her felt angry. Another part dangerously emotional. Because the teenage Ethan she remembered used to spend weekends repairing neighbors' cars for $20 just to help his parents buy groceries. And somehow, despite the billions in magazine covers and polished suits, that same instinct to quietly fix problems still existed inside him. Claire grabbed her coat abruptly before she could think herself out of it. 20 minutes later, she stood outside the luxury hotel downtown where Ethan was staying. Everything about the place screamed money. Marble floors, gold lighting, valets opening doors for expensive cars. Claire suddenly felt painfully aware of her worn sneakers and old cardigan again. But before she could lose her nerve, the hotel elevator doors opened across the lobby. Ethan stepped out alone, loosening his tie slightly as he walked. The second he saw her standing there, surprise crossed his face. Claire. She crossed her arms tightly. You paid for my car. Ethan looked at her quietly for 1 second too long before answering honestly. Yeah. Claire shook her head immediately. You cannot do things like that. But Ethan's expression softened instead of hardening. Why? He asked gently. Because somebody should have helped you a long time ago. Claire stared at Ethan across the polished hotel lobby while his words settled heavily between them. Because somebody should have helped you a long time ago. Nobody had spoken to her with that kind of tenderness in years. Not pity, not obligation, just quiet honesty. Claire shook her head softly, trying to steady herself. You cannot solve my problems because you feel guilty about the past. Ethan stepped closer, his expression calm. This is not guilt. Then what is it? For a moment he did not answer. The golden hotel lights reflected softly across the marble floor while wealthy guests moved through the lobby around them, completely unaware of the history standing in the middle of it. Ethan finally exhaled quietly. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Claire. Her breath caught instantly. Ethan looked down briefly before continuing in a lower voice. And I think losing you changed me more than becoming rich ever did. Claire felt emotion rise so suddenly, she looked away before he could see it fully on her face. She had spent 15 years imagining 100 different versions of what she would say if she ever saw Ethan Carter again. None of those imaginary conversations prepared her for this. Life is different now, she whispered. I have Noah. I work double shifts. I barely keep everything together most weeks. Ethan nodded once. I know. No, you do not. Her voice cracked slightly despite her effort to stay composed. You leave meetings worth millions of dollars and come back to hotels like this. She gestured around the elegant lobby. I go home hoping my debit card does not decline at the grocery store. Ethan's eyes softened painfully. Claire, we are not kids anymore. Silence stretched between them for several seconds before Ethan spoke again. You are right. Claire swallowed hard, already hating the ache growing in her chest. But then he continued quietly. We are not kids anymore. Which means I know exactly what matters now. She looked back at him slowly. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. None of this means anything if I have nobody real to share it with. Claire stared at him speechlessly while the sincerity in his expression dismantled her defenses piece by piece. Then Ethan smiled faintly, almost sadly. Do you know what I did the first year after my company became successful? Claire shook her head. I drove back to Brookfield. Her chest tightened instantly. Everywhere I went reminded me of you. The football field. The diner near the highway. Miller Lake. He laughed softly under his breath. I even parked near your old house for an hour like an idiot. Claire felt tears sting unexpectedly behind her eyes. Ethan looked at her carefully. I thought maybe if I became successful enough, eventually forgetting you would get easier. Did it? She whispered. Ethan held her gaze steadily. No. The answer hit her straight in the heart. Before either of them could say another word, Claire's phone suddenly rang inside her coat pocket. She blinked quickly and answered after seeing Noah's school on the screen. Hello. Miss Bennett, the school secretary said warmly. Just reminding you that Noah's winter performance starts in 20 minutes. Claire's eyes widened. Oh no. She had completely forgotten. I am on my way. She hung up immediately and grabbed her bag. I have to go. Ethan nodded once. Noah's school. Claire blinked in surprise. How did you know? A small smile touched his mouth. You get the same panicked expression you used to get before algebra tests. Despite herself, Claire laughed softly for the first time all night. Ethan's expression warmed instantly at the sound. Come with me, she heard herself say suddenly before she could overthink it. Ethan looked genuinely surprised. Are you sure? Claire hesitated only a second before nodding. 25 minutes later, they slipped quietly into the back of the elementary school auditorium just as children began walking onto the small stage wearing handmade winter costumes. Parents filled the room holding phones and cameras while excited chatter echoed softly through the crowd. Noah spotted them almost immediately from the stage. His entire face lit up the second he saw Ethan sitting beside Claire. Ethan smiled and waved once. Then Noah stood a little taller during the performance, like simply knowing Ethan was there mattered more than anyone realized. Claire glanced sideways at Ethan while applause filled the room around them. He was watching Noah with quiet focus, genuine warmth softening every guarded edge in his expression. And suddenly, for the first time in years, Claire felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Not struggle, not survival. Home.